The ancient stone chamber beneath Lalabella's monastery had kept its secret for 1,500 years. But Dr. Sarah Windwalker's trembling hands were about to shatter that silence forever. Her headlamp cut through the suffocating darkness, illuminating walls carved with symbols that shouldn't exist, intricate patterns that made her Cherokee blood sing with recognition. The air tasted of cedar smoke and something else, something sacred that made her skin prickle with ancestral memory. "This can't be right," she whispered, her voice echoing off the carved walls like a prayer. The manuscript lay before her on a stone altar, its leather binding untouched by time, protected by glass that seemed to shimmer with an inner light. 60 generations of monks had died keeping this secret. Brother Blackhorse had told her. 60 generations of her own people, thousands of miles from their homeland, guardians of something so dangerous it could reshape everything humanity believed about itself. Her fingers hovered over the first page, the ancient script dancing before her eyes like living things. The translation that had taken her 3 sleepless nights to decipher burned in her mind. In the 18th year of his life, the teacher journeyed beyond the great waters to learn from those who knew the true path. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. This wasn't just archaeology anymore. This was revolution. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Dr. Sarah Windwalker had spent 45 years running from her heritage, but the sacred chamber beneath Lalibela Monastery was forcing her to confront everything she'd tried to leave behind. Born on the Cherokee Reservation in Oklahoma, she'd buried her indigenous identity beneath layers of academic achievement and professional success. Harvard PhD, tenure at Yale, best-selling books on ancient civilizations, all of it built on a foundation of denial that crumbled the moment she saw those familiar symbols carved into Ethiopian stone. The death of her 8-year-old daughter Emma 3 years ago had completed Sarah's spiritual destruction. Cancer had taken the child despite every prayer, every ceremony her grandmother had performed. Sarah had turned her back on the Creator, on the old ways, on everything that connected her to her ancestors. Archaeology became her refuge, cold facts, provable theories, nothing that required faith. Brother Joseph Blackhorse emerged from the shadows like a figure from her childhood nightmares. 63 years old, his weathered Navajo features bore the wisdom of countless desert sunrises. He'd been expecting her, he said, had dreamed of her coming for months. His order of Native American monks had guarded this chamber since their ancestors first arrived in Ethiopia generations ago, following trade routes that connected the Americas to the ancient world. Marcus Redwing, Sarah's research assistant, shifted nervously in the doorway. At 32, the Lakota graduate student still believed in the sacred stories their grandmothers told, still carried sage in his backpack, and offered tobacco to the 4 directions. He'd followed Sarah from dig to dig for 5 years, hoping to help her find her way back to the path. Elder Thomas Stormcrow's arrival that evening changed everything. The 80-year-old Hopi historian had been Sarah's mentor before she'd shut him out, before grief had built walls around her heart. His presence in this sacred space felt like destiny, like the convergence of bloodlines and purposes that had been set in motion centuries ago. But Dr. Rebecca Moonfallow's unexpected appearance at the monastery gates sent ice through Sarah's veins. The Ojibwe archaeologist had been Sarah's rival for 20 years, competing for grants, publications, and recognition. Rebecca's reputation for ruthless academic ambition was legendary, and her presence here could only mean trouble. 5 Native Americans, thousands of miles from home, gathered around a manuscript that threatened to rewrite history itself. The weight of ancestral responsibility pressed down on Sarah's shoulders like a mountain. The discovery happened by accident, as most earth-shattering revelations do. Sarah's ground-penetrating radar had detected the anomaly during what should have been a routine archaeological survey of the monastery's foundation. The readings showed a void beneath the ancient church, something that shouldn't exist according to every historical record they'd studied. Brother Blackhorse had watched them work for 3 days before finally approaching. His lined face carried the weight of generations as he spoke in careful English, each word measured like prayer beads. "My grandmother told me this day would come," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "She said a daughter of the Cherokee would arrive when the time was right." The entrance to the chamber had been hidden behind a false wall in the monastery's deepest cellar. Sarah's hands shook as she removed the stones, each one carved with symbols that made her blood sing with recognition. Thunderbirds, sacred spirals, the tree of life, all of it impossibly ancient, impossibly familiar. The manuscript lay on an altar carved from black stone, protected by a glass case that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The leather binding bore no resemblance to anything she'd seen in her 20 years of studying ancient texts. It was made from hide she couldn't identify, stitched with sinew and decorated with beadwork that matched patterns her own grandmother had taught her as a child. Marcus played his flashlight over the walls, revealing more symbols, more impossibilities. "Professor," his voice cracked with emotion, "these are our symbols, our sacred markings. How are they here?" Brother Blackhorse's explanation defied everything Sarah thought she knew about history. His order had been founded by Native American spiritual leaders who had traveled the ancient trade routes 15 centuries ago, carrying sacred knowledge across continents. They had settled in Ethiopia, intermarried with local tribes, but never forgot their mission to guard the manuscript until the prophesied time arrived. 60 generations, Brother Blackhorse repeated, his weathered hands tracing the air above the glass case. 60 generations of my people have died, protecting this. My son died protecting this. My grandson will die protecting this. Unless... He looked directly at Sarah, and she felt something shift deep in her chest, some long-dormant recognition stirring to life. The first pages of the manuscript, when she finally managed to translate them, spoke of a great teacher who had journeyed far from his homeland to learn from the wisdom keepers of distant lands. The details were specific, intimate, written by someone who had witnessed events firsthand. Sacred ceremonies, healing practices, teachings about the divine nature that existed within all people. It read like a bridge between worlds, between faiths she'd never imagined could be connected. But it was the final passage on the first page that made her sink to her knees on the cold stone floor. "And the teacher said unto us, all are children of the Great Spirit, all carry the sacred fire within. Death is but a doorway, and love transcends all boundaries of flesh and time." The words her daughter had whispered in her final moments. The translation shattered Sarah's understanding of everything she thought she knew about ancient history. Working through the night by candlelight, her fingers traced the ancient script as words materialized on her laptop screen, each sentence more revolutionary than the last. The manuscript wasn't just a historical document, It was a detailed account of spiritual practices that predated Christianity by centuries, techniques that her own ancestors had somehow preserved and carried across continents. The text described elaborate healing ceremonies that involved the laying on of hands, meditation practices that induced profound spiritual experiences, and, most shocking of all, detailed accounts of what could only be described as miraculous healings. But these weren't supernatural events. They were described with the clinical precision of someone documenting repeatable techniques, methods that could be learned and taught. "This changes everything," Marcus whispered, reading over her shoulder as dawn light filtered through the chamber's hidden ventilation shafts. "If this is authentic, it means our people were the original teachers. It means the spiritual traditions that colonizers tried to destroy were actually the foundation for everything that came after." Brother Blackhorse nodded slowly, his ancient eyes reflecting decades of carrying this burden. "My grandfather told me the stories, just as his grandfather told him. Our ancestors didn't just travel to distant lands, they were sought out, revered as wisdom keepers. Kings and emperors sent messengers begging them to come, to share the sacred knowledge." But Sarah's academic mind rebelled against the implications. Publishing this discovery would revolutionize not just archaeology, but theology, anthropology, the entire understanding of human spiritual development. It would also make her the target of every religious institution, every government, every power structure that depended on the current version of history. "We can't release this," she said finally, her voice hollow with the weight of the decision. "The world isn't ready. It would cause wars, tear apart religions that billions of people depend on for meaning." Marcus stepped back as if she'd struck him. "You're going to bury this, hide the truth about our people, about our heritage, because you're afraid of controversy." "I'm afraid of genocide," Sarah snapped. "I'm afraid of what happens when every fundamentalist group on Earth decides that indigenous people are a threat to their version of God. I'm afraid of what happened to our ancestors happening all over again." The sound of helicopters overhead cut through their argument like a blade. Brother Blackhorse's face went pale. "Nobody knows about this place," he whispered. "Nobody except Jitter." Rebecca Moonfallow's voice echoed down the stone steps before they saw her silhouette in the chamber entrance. She wasn't alone. 3 men in expensive suits flanked her, their eyes scanning the chamber with the cold efficiency of people accustomed to taking what they wanted. "Hello, Sarah?" Rebecca's voice carried the same poisonous sweetness Sarah remembered from their graduate school days. "I have to say, I'm impressed. When my sources told me you'd found something significant, I expected another pottery shard collection. This," she gestured at the manuscript, "this is worth killing for." The lead man stepped forward, his hand resting casually on something beneath his jacket. "Dr. Windwalker, my employers would like to discuss a business arrangement. This discovery belongs in private hands, where it can be properly managed." Brother Blackhorse moved protectively in front of the altar. "This is sacred ground. You have no right." "We have every right that money can buy," Rebecca interrupted. "The Ethiopian government is very cooperative when the price is right, as is the local bishop, as are the helicopter pilots who'll be here in 20 minutes to collect what we came for." Sarah felt the walls of the chamber closing in around her. 60 generations of guardians. And it would end with her. The sacred knowledge would disappear into some billionaire's private collection, studied by people who saw it only as a commodity to be exploited. The manuscript seemed to pulse with its own light, as if the spirits of her ancestors were crying out for protection. The next 3 days, trapped in the monastery, became a psychological battlefield. Rebecca's mercenaries had sealed the exits, turning the sacred space into a prison while negotiations dragged on. Sarah found herself caught between impossible choices, each decision carrying the weight of centuries. During the long hours of captivity, Brother Blackhorse shared stories that had never been written down, oral traditions passed from grandfather to grandson across 60 generations. He spoke of the first Native American spiritual leaders who had followed the ancient trade routes, carrying medicine bundles and sacred pipes across oceans. They had been welcomed as holy men in distant lands, their ceremonies so powerful that kings and emperors sought their guidance. My ancestor, Running Wolf, kept a journal, Brother Blackhorse said, his voice barely audible in the candlelit chamber. He wrote that the teacher they met in Kashmir was different from other holy men. He carried wounds on his hands and feet, spoke of suffering and resurrection, but he was eager to learn our ways. Running Wolf taught him the vision quest, the sweat lodge ceremony, the sacred breathing that opens the door between worlds. Sarah's hands trembled as she continued translating the manuscript. Each page revealed more disturbing parallels between indigenous spiritual practices and what would later become fundamental Christian teachings. The laying on of hands, the communion with sacred plants, the understanding that all beings carried divine spark, these weren't foreign concepts brought by missionaries. They were ancient Native American teachings that had somehow been preserved and transformed across continents and centuries. Marcus paced the chamber like a caged wolf, his anger growing with each passing hour. How many of our people died protecting traditions that were originally ours, he demanded. How many children were taken from their families, beaten for speaking languages that contained the original sacred knowledge? How many ceremonies were banned? How many medicine people were murdered? All to suppress the very wisdom that became the foundation of the religions that destroyed us. The weight of historical irony was crushing. Sarah thought of her own grandmother, who had died speaking Cherokee words that no one in the family understood anymore. She thought of the boarding schools, the forced conversions, the systematic destruction of indigenous spiritual traditions that had apparently been the wellspring of human sacred knowledge, but it was the personal revelations that broke her heart completely. Deep in the manuscript, she found detailed descriptions of healing ceremonies for children afflicted with wasting diseases. The techniques were so specific, so precisely documented, that they read like medical procedures. Sacred songs to sing, herbs to gather, the exact positioning of hands over the heart and lungs, the prayers to speak to guide a child's spirit safely to the other side when healing was no longer possible. Everything her grandmother had tried to teach her about Emma's illness, everything Sarah had rejected as superstition while her daughter slowly died in sterile hospital rooms. She knew, Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face as the words blurred on her laptop screen. Grandmother knew these ceremonies. She tried to tell me, tried to show me, but I was too educated, too civilized to listen to primitive beliefs. Elder Stormcrow, who had remained silent through most of the ordeal, finally spoke. His voice carried the authority of decades spent bridging the gap between ancient wisdom and modern understanding. The manuscript isn't just about what was, Sarah. It's about what could be. These healing practices, these spiritual techniques, they were never meant to be buried in academic journals or locked away in private collections. They were meant to be lived, practiced, passed on. The irony was suffocating. Here she was, a Cherokee woman who had spent her entire career studying dead civilizations, while the living wisdom of her own ancestors had been hidden beneath an Ethiopian monastery all along. Her people's spiritual heritage hadn't been destroyed by colonization. It had been preserved by a secretive order of Native American monks who had carried it across the world centuries before Columbus was even born. Rebecca grew increasingly impatient as the negotiations stalled. Her backers, she revealed, represented a consortium of private collectors and religious institutions who saw the manuscript as either a priceless artifact or a dangerous threat that needed to be controlled. The Vatican had expressed interest, as had several evangelical organizations and a mysterious billionaire who collected what he called alternative historical narratives. "You're being naive, Sarah," Rebecca said during one of their heated arguments. "This information is going to come out eventually. The question is whether it emerges through proper scholarly channels or gets twisted into conspiracy theories and religious wars. At least my buyers will preserve it, study it responsibly." "Responsibly?" Marcus laughed bitterly. "You mean they'll lock it away where indigenous people can never access their own heritage again, where it becomes another artifact stolen from native peoples and displayed in someone's private museum?" The psychological pressure was deliberate and relentless. Rebecca's team had done their homework, understanding exactly how to manipulate each member of Sarah's group. They offered Marcus a full scholarship to complete his PhD, complete funding for any research project he wanted. They promised Brother Blackhorse that his order would be officially recognized and protected. Their monastery declared a UNESCO World Heritage Site. But it was the offer they made to Sarah that nearly broke her resolve. A complete medical research facility, they promised, dedicated to studying the healing techniques described in the manuscript. Modern medicine combined with ancient wisdom, the potential to save children like Emma, to prevent other parents from experiencing the crushing grief that had destroyed her faith. "Think about it," Rebecca pressed, her voice softer now, almost sisterly. "Your daughter died because you didn't know these techniques existed. How many other children are dying right now while this knowledge sits hidden in a cave? How many families are being torn apart by illnesses that these ceremonies might heal?" Sarah closed her eyes and saw Emma's face, heard her daughter's final words about the sacred fire that burned inside everyone. The manuscript contained detailed instructions for ceremonies that might have saved her. Ancient healing practices that her own ancestors had developed over thousands of years. The weight of that knowledge, the crushing possibility that her child's death had been preventable, nearly drove her to surrender the manuscript entirely. But Elder Stormcrow's weathered hand on her shoulder steadied her resolve. "The ancestors are watching, granddaughter," he whispered. "They're not asking you to carry this burden alone. They're asking you to remember who you are." Outside the chamber, the sound of more helicopters filled the air. Rebecca's reinforcements were arriving, and the window for any kind of resistance was rapidly closing. The confrontation erupted at dawn on the fourth day, when Rebecca's patience finally snapped. Her mercenaries had grown restless, and her financiers were demanding results. The sacred chamber that had housed quiet contemplation for centuries suddenly became a battleground as armed men stormed down the ancient stone steps. "Enough games," Rebecca snarled, her academic facade crumbling to reveal something desperate and hungry underneath. "My buyers want that manuscript, and they're willing to take it over your dead bodies if necessary." Brother Blackhorse stepped protectively in front of the altar, his weathered hands raised in a gesture that was both surrender and defiance. 60 generations of my people died protecting this knowledge. I won't be the one to fail them." The lead mercenary, a cold-eyed man who'd introduced himself only as Mitchell, leveled his weapon at the elderly monk. "Step aside, grandfather. This doesn't have to end in bloodshed." But Sarah saw something in Brother Blackhorse's eyes that made her blood run cold, the same expression her grandmother had worn during her final moments, a mixture of peace and terrible resolve. He was preparing to die rather than surrender the manuscript, and his death would accomplish nothing except adding another tragedy to centuries of indigenous suffering. "Wait." Sarah stepped between the gun and the monk, her mind racing. "You want the manuscript, fine. But I'm the only one who can fully translate it. Kill any of us, and you'll have a leather-bound book full of symbols that your buyers will never be able to decipher." Rebecca's eyes narrowed. "You're bluffing. The translation software can't handle the linguistic variations, the ceremonial context, the symbolic references that require cultural knowledge passed down through oral tradition." Sarah interrupted. "You need me alive, Rebecca. You need all of us alive." Mitchell glanced at Rebecca, uncertainty flickering across his hard features. These men were accustomed to straightforward acquisitions, not complex negotiations involving ancient languages and cultural expertise. The standoff stretched taut as a bowstring until Marcus made a move that changed everything. While attention focused on Sarah and the gunman, he had been slowly edging toward a narrow passage that Brother Blackhorse had shown them earlier, an escape route carved by monks centuries ago for exactly this kind of emergency. "Sarah!" Marcus shouted, diving toward the altar. "The passage!" Chaos erupted. Mitchell spun toward Marcus, his weapon tracking the young man's movement. Brother Blackhorse lunged forward, grabbing for the gun. Elder Stormcrow, moving with surprising agility for his age, swept his walking stick at the legs of another mercenary. Sarah found herself face to face with Rebecca, and for a moment she saw past her rival's cold ambition to something that looked almost like desperation. "Why?" Sarah demanded. "Why are you doing this? You're one of us. Rebecca, you're Ojibwe. These are our ancestors' teachings." "Because I'm tired of being invisible," Rebecca screamed, her composed mask finally shattering completely. "Tired of watching white archaeologists get credit for discoveries we make. Tired of fighting for scraps while they get the funding, the recognition, the respect. This manuscript could make me the most famous archaeologist in the world. For once, an indigenous woman would be the one holding all the cards." The pain in Rebecca's voice hit Sarah like a physical blow. She recognized it because she'd felt it herself, the exhaustion of always having to work twice as hard for half the recognition, the constant battle against stereotypes and assumptions, the way their own people sometimes accused them of selling out to the academic establishment. But before Sarah could respond, the crack of gunfire filled the chamber. Marcus cried out, clutching his shoulder as blood seeped between his fingers. He'd been trying to reach the manuscript when Mitchell's shot caught him, spinning him around and sending him crashing into the stone wall. "Marcus!" Sarah dropped to her knees beside him, pressing her hands against the wound. Blood pulsed between her fingers, warm and frighteningly fast. "Oh God, No, not again. Not again. Elder Stormcrow was beside her instantly, his gnarled hand surprisingly steady as he examined the wound. "It's not fatal," he said quietly. "But he needs medical attention soon." Mitchell leveled his weapon at Marcus's head. "The manuscript, or the boy dies. Your choice." "Dr. Windwalker." Brother Blackhorse moved to the altar with the slow dignity of a man walking to his own execution. His hands shook as he reached for the glass case. 60 generations of sacred trust about to be broken in a single moment. "Stop," a new voice commanded from the chamber entrance. Sarah looked up to see figures in the shadows, Ethiopian federal police, armed and serious. But leading them was a woman Sarah didn't recognize, someone whose presence seemed to shift the entire energy of the room. "Dr. Rebecca Moonfallow," the woman said, her accent distinctly Ethiopian but her English perfect. "You are under arrest for theft of cultural artifacts, bribery of government officials, and conspiracy to commit violence against religious persons." Rebecca's face went white. "That's impossible. We paid everyone. We had guarantees." The woman smiled coldly. "You paid the wrong people. You paid the wrong... Did you really think the Ethiopian government would allow foreign mercenaries to loot one of our most sacred sites? Did you think we wouldn't notice helicopter traffic over a restricted monastery?" Mitchell and his men found themselves surrounded, their weapons useless against the superior numbers and positioning of the federal police, as they were disarmed and led away in restraints. The woman approached Sarah. "Dr. Windwalker, I am Inspector Mahari of Ethiopia's Cultural Heritage Protection Unit. We've been monitoring this situation since Dr. Moonfallow first entered the country. Brother Blackhorse contacted us days ago." Sarah looked at the elderly monk, who managed a weak smile despite the trauma of the last few minutes. "Insurance," he said simply. "My grandfather always said, trust in the Creator, but make sure the authorities know where to find the bodies." The helicopter evacuation to Addis Ababa should have felt like salvation, but Sarah could only watch helplessly as Marcus's life ebbed away in the medical bay. The bullet had nicked an artery, and despite Elder Stormcrow's field treatment, he was losing too much blood too quickly. The Ethiopian medics worked frantically, their hands slick with red as they fought to stabilize him during the turbulent flight. "He's crashing," one of the medics shouted over the helicopter's roar. "Blood pressure's dropping. We're losing him." Sarah gripped Marcus's cold hand, feeling his pulse flutter like a dying bird beneath her fingers. His lips moved soundlessly, trying to form words that the oxygen mask muffled. She leaned closer, straining to hear above the engine noise. "The manuscript," he whispered, his eyes struggling to focus on her face. "Don't let them bury it, like they buried everything else." "Save your strength," Sarah pleaded, but she could see the light fading from his eyes, the same look Emma had given her in those final moments, that terrible mixture of love and goodbye that no parent should ever witness. "Please, Marcus, I can't lose you too." But Marcus's hand went limp in hers, and the steady beep of the heart monitor became one long, endless scream. The medics worked over his body for another 20 minutes, pumping his chest, injecting stimulants, shocking his heart with defibrillators. Nothing worked. Marcus Redwing, 32 years old, died at 3:47 p.m. Ethiopian time, his blood staining the helicopter floor while the sacred manuscript he'd died protecting remained locked in its glass case back at the monastery. Sarah's scream of grief drowned out even the helicopter blades. At the hospital in Addis Ababa, Inspector Mahari tried to offer comfort, but Sarah was beyond consolation. She sat in the sterile waiting room, still covered in Marcus's blood, staring at nothing, while Elder Stormcrow's weathered hand rested on her shoulder. "He died for nothing," Sarah whispered, her voice hollow with despair. "The manuscript is still there, still hidden, still useless. Another young native man dead. And for what? So we can keep pretending that our ancestors' wisdom doesn't matter." Brother Blackhorse, who had arrived on a later flight, knelt beside her chair. His own grief showed in every line of his face. Marcus had reminded him of his own grandson, lost to drugs and despair on the reservation years earlier. He died protecting sacred knowledge. Child, that's not nothing. That's everything. Sacred knowledge that helps no one. Sarah exploded, her composure finally cracking completely. Hidden away in a cave, guarded by ghosts, while children like Emma and young men like Marcus die because we're too afraid to share what we know. 60 generations of secrecy, and what has it accomplished? Nothing but more death, more suffering, more indigenous people carrying burdens that crush them. The words poured out of her like poison from a wound, years of suppressed anger and grief, decades of watching her people struggle while their own heritage remained locked away from them. She raged against the secrecy, against the guardianship, against the cosmic joke of discovering healing wisdom too late to save anyone she loved. Elder Stormcrow let her fury burn itself out before speaking. "You think the ancestors kept this knowledge hidden to punish us?" he asked quietly. "You think they wanted our children to suffer?" "I don't know what they wanted," Sarah sobbed. "I don't know anything anymore. I'm supposed to be the smart one, the educated one, the one who bridges two worlds. But I couldn't save my daughter with all my degrees, and I couldn't save Marcus with all my knowledge. What good am I?" "Maybe," Elder Stormcrow said gently. "The question isn't what good you are. Maybe the question is what good the knowledge is if it dies with us." Inspector Mahari cleared her throat diplomatically. "Dr. Windwalker, I'm afraid there are decisions that need to be made. The manuscript remains at the monastery, but my government is under pressure from several international parties. The Vatican has made inquiries. So have representatives from various American universities and private collectors. Without clear guidance from you and Brother Blackhorse about its disposition—" She didn't finish the sentence, but Sarah understood. The Ethiopian government wouldn't sit on such a potentially valuable discovery indefinitely. If the rightful guardians couldn't decide what to do with it, others would make that decision for them. Sarah looked at Marcus's blood still caked under her fingernails and felt something crystallize in her chest, cold and hard as diamonds. Her daughter was dead. Marcus was dead. 60 generations of guardians had lived and died protecting knowledge that had never saved anyone. It was time for the secrecy to end, no matter what the consequences. But first, She had to call Marcus's grandmother on the Pine Ridge Reservation and explain why her grandson wasn't coming home. The truth came in fragments, delivered by Elder Stormcrow in the sterile hospital room while Sarah sat numb with grief. Each revelation hit like a physical blow, reshaping everything she thought she understood about the past 3 days, about her life, about the deaths that had haunted her for years. The manuscript was never destroyed, Elder Stormcrow said quietly, his weathered hands folded in his lap. What you saw burning in the chamber was a decoy. Pages we prepared years ago in case something like this happened. Brother Blackhorse has been planning for this confrontation his entire life. Sarah's head snapped up, confusion cutting through her grief. What are you talking about? I watched it burn. I saw Rebecca's men. You saw what we needed you to see. Brother Blackhorse interrupted, entering the room with a canvas bag slung over his shoulder. The real manuscript has been safe in my quarters this entire time. We had to test you, Sarah. Had to test. Had to know if you would protect the knowledge or exploit it. The betrayal felt like another death. Test me. Marcus died for a test. Marcus died because he threw himself in front of a bullet meant for the manuscript. Brother Blackhorse said sadly, his death was real. His sacrifice was real. But the knowledge he died protecting is still safe. Sarah stood abruptly, rage and grief warring in her chest. How dare you? How dare you let him die for your games, your tests, your sister's games? Elder Stormcrow said quietly. The words stopped Sarah cold. My what? Brother Blackhorse opened the canvas bag and withdrew a folder thick with documents. Dr. Rebecca Moonfallow isn't your academic rival, Sarah. She's your half-sister, your father's daughter from his first marriage, before he met your mother on the reservation. Sarah sank back into her chair, the world tilting sideways. That's impossible. Rebecca is Ojibwe. Her family was destroyed when she was 7 years old, Elder Stormcrow continued, his voice heavy with old sorrow. House fire on the White Earth Reservation. Parents, grandparents, 2 younger brothers all dead. Your father was her closest surviving relative. But he was already married to your mother, already building a new life. He chose to let Rebecca disappear into the foster system rather than disrupt his Cherokee family. The photographs in the folder showed a little girl with Sarah's eyes and their father's jawline, standing beside a man Sarah recognized from her own childhood memories. Rebecca at 8, holding a social worker's hand. Rebecca at 12, angry and defiant in a group home. Rebecca at 16, accepting a scholarship to college with no family present to celebrate. She's been watching you your entire life, Brother Blackhorse said, following your career, your successes, your marriage, your daughter's birth. She was at Emma's funeral. Sarah, standing in the back, wearing dark glasses, mourning a niece she'd never been allowed to meet. Sarah's hands shook as she flipped through the documents. College transcripts, job applications, research proposals, a paper trail of a brilliant woman systematically building the credentials to intersect with her sister's life. Every collaboration Sarah thought was coincidental. Every conference where they'd clashed, every academic rivalry that had seemed so random, it had all been orchestrated by a sister she'd never known existed. The mercenaries, the consortium of buyers, all of it was fabricated. Elder Stormcrow continued. Rebecca hired actors, created fake organizations, built an elaborate fiction to force a crisis that would bring you two together. She wanted to tell you the truth about your relationship, But she needed leverage first. She thought if she controlled something you valued, she could finally have the sister she'd always dreamed of. The third revelation shattered what was left of Sarah's equilibrium. Brother Blackhorse pulled out a medical file, its pages yellow with age. Your daughter's death wasn't just tragic, Sarah. It was preventable. The cancer that killed Emma. It's the same genetic mutation that runs in your father's line. Rebecca's brothers died of it. Rebecca herself is a carrier. Sarah stared at the genetic analysis. The familial cancer markers highlighted in clinical terms that translated to unbearable personal loss. You're saying, if I'd known about Rebecca, if I'd known about the family history, Emma could have been screened early, treated aggressively, possibly saved. Brother Blackhorse confirmed. Rebecca has lived with that knowledge for 3 years. She's the sister who could have prevented your daughter's death, if only your father hadn't chosen to erase her existence. The weight of it was crushing. Sarah's daughter had died not just from cancer, but from family secrets, from the systematic way indigenous families were fractured and scattered, from the decision to prioritize one branch of the family tree while letting another disappear into institutional neglect. She never meant for Marcus to be hurt, Elder Stormcrow said gently. The guns, the mercenaries, they were all props in an elaborate theater designed to create urgency, to force difficult conversations. But Marcus was too brave for his own good. When he saw what he thought was a real threat to the manuscript, he acted to protect it. Sarah closed her eyes and saw Marcus's face in those final moments. His whispered words about not letting them bury the knowledge like they'd buried everything else. He'd died protecting what he believed was sacred wisdom under threat, never knowing he was dying for an elaborate family reunion orchestrated by a sister's desperate need for connection. "Where is she?" Sarah asked, her voice barely audible. "Ethiopian authorities released her this morning," Brother Blackhorse said. "The charges were dropped when we explained the situation. She's at a hotel downtown, waiting to see if you'll talk to her." Sarah looked at the photographs again, seeing her own features reflected in a stranger's face, recognizing the same stubborn jaw that had gotten them both through graduate school, the same dark eyes that had stared back at her from mirrors her entire life. Somewhere in the city, her sister was waiting for a conversation that was 38 years overdue. The hotel room overlooked Addis Ababa's bustling streets, but Sarah saw none of it as she sat across from the sister she'd never known existed. Rebecca looked smaller somehow, stripped of her academic armor and elaborate deceptions. Her eyes were red from crying, and she clutched a tissue like a lifeline. "I never meant for anyone to get hurt," Rebecca whispered, her voice hoarse from grief. "The guns weren't even loaded. The whole thing was supposed to be theater. Just enough drama to force us into the same room, to make you listen to me." Sarah studied her sister's face, seeing their father's stubborn chin, their shared Cherokee cheekbones beneath Rebecca's Ojibwe tribal features. 38 years, Rebecca. 38 years you've known about me, and this was how you chose to introduce yourself. How else? Rebecca's composure cracked. Send a Christmas card. Show up at a conference and say, "Hi, I'm the sister Dad threw away when you were born." You had everything. Sarah? The family, the recognition, the perfect academic career. I had nothing but foster homes and the knowledge that my own father chose you over me. The pain in Rebecca's voice was raw. Decades of abandonment and rejection crystallized into this moment. Sarah felt her anger wavering, replaced by something deeper and more complicated. Emma could have lived, Sarah said quietly. Rebecca nodded, tears streaming down her face. I know. I've carried that guilt for 3 years. I watched your daughter's obituary online, saw the genetic markers in the medical reports, and realized I could have saved her. If I'd had the courage to contact you earlier, if I'd overcome my pride and jealousy. The manuscript lay between them on the hotel bed, finally free from its glass case. Brother Blackhorse had entrusted it to Sarah for one night, one chance to decide its fate with the sister who had orchestrated this entire crisis. So what now? Sarah asked. Sarah, we cry together. Hug it out and pretend the last 4 decades didn't happen. Rebecca looked up, hope flickering in her eyes for the first time. Maybe we start with Marcus's funeral. Maybe we honor the man who died bringing us together. And then we figure out how to be sisters. Sarah reached across the space between them and took Rebecca's hand. Maybe we figure out how to heal our people's knowledge instead of hiding it. For the first time in years, Sarah felt something like peace settling in her chest. You know that feeling when you realize you've spent your whole life running from the very thing that could have saved you. That's what Sarah Windwalker discovered in that Ethiopian monastery that the healing wisdom her grandmother tried to share. The sacred knowledge she'd dismissed as old superstition was actually the key to everything she'd lost. How many of us have done the same thing? Pushed away our elders' stories, rolled our eyes at their remedies, chosen modern solutions over ancient wisdom passed down through generations. Sarah's daughter Emma died of a genetic condition that could have been prevented if she'd known her family's complete medical history, if pride and old wounds hadn't kept sisters apart for nearly 4 decades. Marcus Redwing died protecting knowledge that belonged to his people. Knowledge that had been scattered and hidden while children suffered needlessly. This isn't just a story about archaeologists and ancient manuscripts. It's about all of us who've lost touch with our roots, who've let family feuds and generational trauma rob us of the healing we desperately need. Sometimes the very thing we're running from, whether it's family secrets, cultural traditions, or difficult conversations, holds the key to our salvation. Don't let pride cost you what matters most.